The knife was already at Iris Sterling's throat before she understood what she had walked into. The blade was cold. Not the cold of steel, but the cold of something ancient. Something forged in a world that predated human memory. And the hand that held it belonged to a vampire who had been alive for 6 centuries and had never once been told no. His name was Lord Cassivian Moray, and he was smiling. "The little human teacher," he said softly, circling her from behind, his white hair falling over one pale shoulder like spilled moonlight. I wondered when Astarion would make his mistake. I have been waiting a very long time. The great hall of the Valemont court stretched around her, black marble floors reflecting the chandelier light in shivering ripples. 36 vampires stood in perfect, terrible stillness at the edges of the room, watching with silver eyes that gave away nothing. None of them moved to help her. None of them looked as though they intended to. Iris did not scream. She had learned, in the 5 months she had spent inside these walls, that screaming achieved nothing and cost everything. Instead, she pressed one hand flat against the stone pillar beside her and breathed through her nose. Slowly, the way her mother had taught her to breathe before a difficult conversation. "Lord Cassivian," she said, keeping her voice even, "I would appreciate it if you removed that blade." "Would you?" He sounded amused. "Does the king know how bold his little project has become? She is not a project." The voice came from the far end of the hall, low and quiet and devastatingly certain, and every vampire in the room turned at once toward the figure descending the grand staircase. The chandelier light moved across him like something reverent. White hair pulled back at the nape of his neck, black coat perfectly fitted across shoulders that carried the weight of 1,000 years without visible strain. Eyes the color of silver coins caught at the bottom of a winter river. Astarion Valemont, king of the Valemont court, sovereign of the eldest bloodline on the continent, did not hurry. He never hurried. But there was something in the quality of his stillness as he reached the bottom step that made Cassivian Moray's hand tighten on the blade. The stillness of a predator deciding whether to act. "Release her," Astarion said. "My king." Cassivian's voice carried the particular music of a trap springing closed. "I am simply demonstrating what every member of this court has known for months. You have compromised yourself. You have allowed a human, a mortal, a blood vessel with a school credential, inside your court, inside your confidence, inside your chambers for conversation that should have remained political. The blood law of the eldest council is clear. No human may hold court influence without a formal bond declaration, and you have made no such declaration." The room did not move. Astarion walked toward her, each step precise, and Iris watched his face with the same focused attention she gave to every difficult text she had ever taught, searching for the subtext beneath the surface, the meaning beneath the word. She had become very good at reading him, better than he knew. "Then I make the declaration now," Astarion said, stopping 5 feet from where Cassivian held her. His silver eyes moved to Iris, and something passed through them. Something he had been burying for months beneath politeness and protocol, and the careful performance of coldness. "Iris Sterling is under my formal protection. Any blade raised against her is a blade raised against this throne." Cassivian laughed. It was not a kind laugh. "That is not how the blood law works, my king, and you know it. A protection declaration requires a bond, and a bond requires consent," Iris said clearly. Both vampires looked at her. She met Astarion's gaze. "I know the blood law. I have spent 3 months studying it. A formal court bond requires that the human give consent freely, without coercion, and that the vampire king acknowledge them before the court as a recognized companion under ancient rite. Is that correct?" Astarion was looking at her with an expression she had only seen on his face once before. The night she had stayed 3 hours past her scheduled teaching session to correct an assumption he had made about the French Enlightenment, and he had listened with such focused attention that she had suddenly understood, all at once, that no one in his court had disagreed with him in a very long time. "That is correct," he said. "Then I consent," Iris said, "freely, without coercion. Now remove that blade from my throat, Lord Cassivian, before your king runs out of patience." The silence that followed was extraordinary. Cassivian withdrew the blade. His expression was no longer amused. And Astarion Valemont, king of the eldest court, for the first time in the memory of anyone present, looked to human being, as though she had just handed him something he had not known he was waiting to receive. Iris had not come to the Valemont court looking for a vampire king. She had come looking for a job. The advertisement had been precise and unusual, a private tutoring contract, offered by the Valemont Foundation, requesting a specialist in modern literature, political history, and Enlightenment philosophy. The salary was extraordinary. The location was listed as a private estate in the old quarter of the city, address disclosed upon acceptance. The contract included a confidentiality clause that was 17 pages long. Iris had read all 17 pages, identified 3 clauses that she found ethically questionable, and submitted a counteroffer. They had accepted. She learned what she was walking into on the morning of her first day, when the car that collected her drove past the public entrance of the old manor house and descended into an underground arrival hall that had no business existing beneath a building registered in 1887. The architecture below was older than the building above. The staff who met her were very pale and moved with precision that was not quite human. The man who had hired her met her in a sitting room lined with bookshelves and lit by low electric light. He was standing at a window that looked onto an interior courtyard lit by artificial daylight panels. She would learn later that the entire underground complex ran on artificially regulated light cycles, designed to allow vampires who could tolerate diffuse illumination to function without triggering their sunlight sensitivity. He did not introduce himself as a vampire. He introduced himself as Astarion Valemont, and he offered her tea, and he told her the curriculum he wanted covered in terms so precise and so intellectually serious that she forgot for a full 14 minutes to be frightened. "You want to understand the French Revolution," she said when he had finished. "I want to understand why humans repeat it," he said. "I watched it happen the first time. I found the pattern more interesting than the outcome." She had looked at him for a moment. "How old are you?" "Old enough to have been wrong about several things I was once very certain of," he said, "which is, I believe, the prerequisite for genuine education." She had started the following Tuesday. The first weeks were professional and carefully bounded. Astarion was a rigorous student, demanding, precise, occasionally argumentative, and possessed of the particular intellectual stubbornness of someone who had spent centuries being agreed with by everyone around him. Iris pushed back. She had always pushed back. It was, her former students had told her, both her greatest professional strength and the reason she terrified them. Astarion did not look terrified. He looked increasingly engaged. The court did not understand it. Iris could feel their attention every time she walked the corridors, the cool silver eyes tracking her movement, the murmured conversations that stopped just as she turned a corner. She was human, she was temporary, she was, in the court's collective opinion, either a naive mistake or a calculated distraction. She was neither. What she was, she had slowly come to understand, was the first person in Astarion Valamont's very long life who had spoken to him not as a king, not as a predator, not as an ancient power to be feared or flattered, but simply as a person who had read the same books and wanted to argue about them. It had taken 2 months for her to understand that this was, to him, something close to revolutionary. It happened gradually, the way real things always happen, not in a single dramatic moment, but in 100 small ones that accumulated until they formed something undeniable. It happened in the argument over Voltaire that lasted 4 hours, and ended with Astarion admitting he had been applying 18th century logic to a 21st century problem. It happened in the evening he found her asleep in the library, 3 texts open across her lap, and covered her with his own coat before waking her, an act of small tenderness that he clearly had not planned, and that clearly embarrassed him when she noticed. It happened in the night she asked him what it was like to watch people die, and he answered her honestly, in a voice she had never heard him use in the company of his court. "It becomes," he said, "a kind of permanent ache. Not grief, exactly. More like carrying a room full of people inside you who cannot speak anymore. You learn to function around the weight." Iris had thought about that for a long time. "That sounds very lonely," she had said finally. He had not answered. But he had not dismissed it either, which was, she had learned, the Astarion Valemont equivalent of agreement. By the 4th month, the sessions had expanded well beyond the original curriculum. They were reading contemporary fiction alongside the political texts. She had brought him 3 novels she loved, and he had read all of them within 48 hours, and his marginal notes, written in a hand that was at once archaic and precise, were the most interesting reader responses she had ever encountered. He had asked why the protagonist of the second novel made a choice that cost them everything, and she had explained it, and he had been quiet for a long time and then said, "I think I have been making the opposite mistake." And she had not asked him to explain what he meant because she was beginning to understand. The court saw none of this. What the court saw was their king spending increasing time with a human teacher, his expression when he thought no one was watching, carrying something they could not categorize, something that did not belong to the cold, sovereign face he showed them in formal sessions. They called it a distraction. Lord Cassivian Moore called it a vulnerability. He was not entirely wrong. After the confrontation in the great hall, after Cassivian withdrew his blade, and the court dispersed with the particular silence of aristocrats recalibrating, Astarion walked Iris through the private corridor to his study, closed the heavy oak door behind them both, and stood looking at her with an expression that had dropped every layer of court performance. "You should not have done that," he said. "Which part?" she asked, sitting down in the chair across from his desk the way she always did, as though nothing catastrophic had just happened, because in her experience the best way to handle catastrophe was to refuse to let it reorganize the room. "The part where I didn't scream, or the part where I cited blood law at a 600-year-old lord?" "The part where you consented to a bond," he said, "without knowing what it means." "I know what it means," Iris said. "I told you. I spent 3 months reading the law texts you keep in the East Library." "You read?" He stopped. Something crossed his face. "Those texts are in Old Valak, I know. I taught myself enough to get through them. It took a while." She met his eyes. "Astarion, I have been inside your court for 5 months. I know what Cassivian has been building. I know the alliance he has been assembling with the Mora bloodline and the 2 eldest houses on the southern continent. I know he has been waiting for a legal mechanism to challenge your authority, and I know the only vulnerability he could find was me. I was not going to let him use me against you." Astarion was looking at her with that expression she could not fully name, the one that appeared when she said something that reached further into him than he had been prepared for. "You could have been killed," he said. "He would not have killed me," Iris said. "Not in front of the court, not before he'd used me as the lever. Cassivian is calculating. He needed a scene, not a murder. I just changed what the scene accomplished. You gambled your life on your reading of his psychology. I gamble my life on my reading of people every day," Iris said. "I'm a teacher. I walked into rooms full of teenagers who did not want to be there and convinced them to care about dead philosophers. Reading rooms is the entire job." The corner of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. She had learned that Astarion's smiles were like rare weather events, significant and brief, but it was close to one. "Iris," he said, and the way he said her name in that moment was different from every other time he had said it, quieter, more careful, as though it meant something it had not been allowed to mean before. "The bond declaration," she said carefully. Does it require anything that I should know about? Any formal ritual? It requires that I acknowledge you," he said, "before the full court, formally. It creates a legal status that is recognized by the eldest council and cannot be challenged without challenging me directly." He paused. "It also means that you are bound to this court in legal terms for as long as the declaration stands. Your freedom of movement is not restricted, but your identity, your safety becomes inseparable from mine." "And what does it mean to you?" she asked. "Not legally, personally." The silence that followed was very long. "It means," he said slowly, "that I stop pretending I do not feel what I feel." Iris did not look away from him. "Which is what, exactly?" He walked to the window, the courtyard window, the one that looked onto the artificial light, and stood with his back to her for a moment, and she understood that this was difficult for him in a way that had nothing to do with power or politics. She had come to understand that Astarion Valamant was a person who had spent 1,000 years building fortifications around himself, and had become so expert at maintaining them that he had forgotten, somewhere along the way, that the fortifications were not the same as the person inside. "I was not cold before," he said to the window. "I want you to know that. There was a time, very early, long before this court, before these laws, when I felt things in the way I understand you mean. Fully. Without the particular discipline of someone who has learned that feeling fully is a liability when you are going to outlive everything you feel for." He turned to look at her over his shoulder, and then I learned to feel less, or to feel the same and show nothing. And eventually the showing nothing became so practiced that the court assumed it was the truth, and I did not correct them, because it was easier to be thought cold than to explain the alternative. "The alternative being that you feel everything," Iris said quietly. "The alternative," he said, turning fully, "being that I have been feeling a great deal more than is professionally appropriate for the last several months." Iris stood up from her chair. She crossed the room to where he stood. Not quickly, not dramatically, but with the same deliberate calm she brought to everything, and stopped 2 feet in front of him and looked up at his face, which was watching her with an intensity that she had learned to stop trying to deflect. "Astarion," she said, "I came here for a job. I stayed because of you. Not the contract, not the library, not the extraordinary salary, though the salary is genuinely excellent. I stayed because you are the most genuinely curious, genuinely engaged, genuinely complicated person I have ever had a real conversation with, and because, somewhere in month 3, I realized I was spending more time thinking about your opinions than about anyone else's, which is either a professional failing or something more significant." He reached out and put one hand along her jaw, very gently, the way someone touches something they are afraid of damaging. "The court will not accept this easily," he said. "The court thought you were cold," Iris said. "They were wrong about that. They'll probably be wrong about several other things as well." His thumb moved along her cheekbone. The look on his face was one she recognized from books, not vampire books, not ancient texts, but the novels she had brought him, the ones with protagonists who made choices that cost them everything and could not have done otherwise. He kissed her carefully as though it were a decision he had made after very long consideration, which she suspected it was. She kissed him back without hesitation, which she suspected surprised him, and then felt him exhale. A long, slow release of something that had been held for a very long time, and leaned into her with a warmth that had nothing cold about it. The bond declaration was scheduled for the following evening. The hours between were the kind of hours that exist in a particular quality of suspended time. Full of small conversations and large silences, the electric awareness of something that has been named and cannot be unnamed. Iris sat in the library and reviewed the old Valak text of the Declaration Right, checking her translations. Astarion appeared at the door 2 hours before midnight, looked at her working, and stayed. He sat in the chair across from her without speaking, and she did not ask him why, and they spent an hour reading in the same room in a silence that was so comfortable it felt like something they had been doing for decades. "You're not nervous," he said eventually. "I'm terrified," Iris corrected without looking up from her text. "You don't look it." "I know. It's the same face I use in difficult classrooms. It's a professional skill." She looked up. "Are you nervous?" "I have not been nervous," he said, "since approximately 1347. I am recalibrating." "What were you nervous about in 1347? "The Black Death," he said. "I was concerned it would affect vampires. It did not, but the uncertainty was significant." She stared at him. "You're comparing our bond declaration to the Black Death, in terms of scale of personal uncertainty." "Astarion, yes. Stop, yes." She almost laughed. She had been almost laughing around him increasingly often. "Go manage your court. I will be ready at midnight." The great hall at midnight looked entirely different from the empty, dangerous space it had been that morning. The full court had assembled, every bloodline represented, every lord and lady in their formal attire, silver and black and deep crimson, the colors of the eldest lineages. The light was lower, the chandelier flames turned to their warmest setting, giving the marble hall a quality that was at once ceremonial and profoundly old. Lord Cassivian Moray was present. He stood near the back wall with his allies grouped around him. Lady Vesra Danthil, ancient and still and watchful. Lord Rothane of the southern delegation. 2 others whose names Iris had memorized from the court records she had spent her lunch hours reading. Cassivian's face was composed. He looked like a man watching a chess game proceed toward a conclusion he had already calculated. Iris walked in at midnight wearing the only formal dress she owned. Dark blue, understated. The kind of thing she had bought for conferences and never quite expected to need in a vampire court. And the room shifted. Every pair of silver eyes tracked her. She walked down the center of the hall to where Astarion stood on the raised platform before the throne, and she did not hurry, and she did not look at anyone but him. He was in full formal attire. Black coat with silver at the cuffs and collar. The Valemont crest visible in the ring he wore. White hair free around his shoulders for the ceremony, making him look like something out of a portrait in a museum that should not be able to move. He watched her approach with an expression the court had never seen on his face. Open, unguarded, specific in a way that made several of the eldest ladies exchange glances, because they had been alive long enough to recognize it. The court herald read the declaration in Old Valak. Iris followed along, her translation running beside the spoken words in her memory, checking herself. When it came to the portion that required her response, she gave it in Old Valak. The silence that followed was not the silence of a room that had expected this. It was the silence of a room recalibrating in real time. Astarion's expression, for just one moment, was pure unguarded delight. The herald completed the rite. Astarion took her hand, and the formal gesture was required by law, but the way he held it was not the formal grip, but the particular interweaving of fingers that meant something private in any language. "The declaration is complete," he said to the court. "Iris Sterling is recognized under the ancient rite. Her protection is the throne's protection. Her status is sovereign acknowledged." His silver gaze moved to Cassivian Moray. "If there is a challenge to this declaration, it must be filed with the eldest council within 7 days, with full evidence of legal violation. I invite the attempt." Cassivian said nothing. The calculation behind his eyes was still running. But the particular move he had been building toward, the exposure of Astarion's attachment as a political weakness, the use of blood law to force a crisis, had been removed from the board, not defeated. Removed, he would find another angle. Iris knew it. She was fairly certain Astarion knew it. But tonight, Cassivian bowed and said nothing, and the court dispersed, and the two of them stood on the platform while the hall emptied around them, and Astarion kept holding her hand. "Old Valak," he said quietly. "I told you 3 months. You translated the response phrase as with full cognizance and free will I accept this binding. The traditional feminine form would have used a longer suffix. I used the sovereign neutral form," Iris said. "It's legally cleaner and doesn't encode a hierarchy between the binding parties." He looked at her for a long moment. "You are the most extraordinary person I have met in 1,000 years. You're probably not considering your full sample size correctly," she said. "You've met an enormous number of people. The statistical variance alone." He kissed her again, which was an effective method of stopping a statistics argument, which she suspected he knew. The challenge came 11 days later, not through the Eldest Taste Council, which would have been clean and legal and within the system Astarion had established. It came through Lord Cassivian's oldest and most dangerous ally, a vampire named Meldris Oranthis, who was not a member of the Valemont court and therefore not bound by its declarations, and who arrived at the estate gates with documentation claiming that Iris Sterling had, under the previous identity framework of Cassivian's challenge, been operating as an unregistered intelligence asset inside a sovereign court, which under the Eldest Council's international protocols constituted grounds for immediate detention pending review. It was a legal fiction. Iris recognized it immediately. But it was a legal fiction with enough structural teeth to create a genuine crisis, because the Eldest Council's international protocols existed outside the jurisdiction of any single court. Astarion's declaration, however valid internally, could not override a formal international detention claim. Meldris Oranthis had brought 6 of his own court's enforcers. The confrontation happened in the entrance hall, which was large enough to feel like a battlefield, and old enough to feel like one had happened there before. Astarion stood between Iris and the delegation with the complete physical stillness that she had come to understand was not calm. It was controlled fury, held in place by will alone. "The claim is fraudulent," Astarion said. "The claim is filed," Meldris said pleasantly. He was older than Kazivian, his white hair shorter, his face carrying the particular smoothness of very ancient vampires, whose expressions had become refined by centuries of courtly performance. The filing is sufficient for provisional detention under Article 17 of the Council Protocols. You know this, Astarion. We both know this, and the timing, Astarion said, is coincidental. Entirely. Meldris smiled. Iris looked at the documentation being held out and said calmly, "May I?" Meldris looked surprised. He handed it to her. She read it standing in the entrance hall, Astarion at her shoulder, the 6 enforcers watching her. And she read it the way she read student essays, looking for the logical fault lines, the places where the argument did not support the conclusion, the moments where the evidence and the claim did not actually match. She found 3 in the first 2 pages. Article 17, she said, applies to intelligence assets operating within a court that has not granted them recognized status. The recognized status under the Valmont Declaration, filed and completed 11 days ago, predates your filing by 9 days. A retroactive application of Article 17 to a status that did not exist at the time of the alleged violation would require the Council's emergency tribunal, not a provisional filing. Furthermore, she turned to the second document. The classification of tutoring as intelligence activity requires that the court whose secrets are allegedly being gathered file the initial complaint. This complaint was filed by Lord Meldris Oranthis, who is not a member of the Valmont Court and has no standing to file on behalf of secrets allegedly gathered here. Silence. And thirdly, she said, handing the documents back, you have Article 17 subsection numbering wrong. The provision you need is 17C, not 17. 17 covers military assets. You wanted 17C, which covers civilian intelligence. But 17C has an explicit exemption for recognized companions under ancient right, which was added in 1923 specifically to protect this situation from political weaponization. She looked at Meldris. I am guessing you did not write this filing yourself. Your legal team needs better researchers. Meldris Oranthis looked at the documents in his hand. He looked at Iris. He looked at Astarion. Astarion said, with a quietness that was not remotely quiet, I suggest you leave. They left. When the door closed, Astarion turned to her, and she saw very clearly that he was shaking. Not with anger, but with something much more vulnerable than anger. The specific tremor of someone who has been very close to losing something they had not yet fully admitted was essential to them. Iris, I'm all right, she said. I know you are, he said. I know you are capable. I know you are extraordinary. I am not. He stopped. He put both hands on her face very carefully. I have been alive for 1,000 years, and I have never been as afraid as I was in the 11 seconds between Meldris presenting that document and you reaching for it. 11 seconds, she said softly. You counted. I count everything, he said. It is a habit of very old minds. It keeps the present from slipping. She put her hands over his. You were afraid of losing me. Yes. Then stop letting people try to take me, she said. And help me build something they cannot use against either of us. What did you have in mind? The eldest council, she said. Not as an adversary, as a resource. The protocols you've been treating as external constraints are also protection mechanisms. If we file for formal recognition of my status at the council level, not just court level, Kazivian and Meldris lose every legal angle simultaneously. It becomes a continental precedent rather than a court-specific declaration. He was looking at her with that expression again. You have been planning this, he said. I have been thinking about it, she said carefully, since the Great Hall, since Kazivian and the Blade. I have been thinking about all the ways he could come at us, and which paths close which approaches, and what the most sustainable architecture of protection actually looks like. She paused. I am a teacher. I build curriculum. This is just a different kind of curriculum. What obstacles are present? What order do we address them in? What resources do we actually have? You are remarkable, he said. And his voice had dropped into the register he used when the performance was entirely gone. When it was just him, speaking from the room full of people he carried inside him. Speaking in the voice of someone who had been waiting a very long time for this particular conversation. Do you know that I did not believe, when you arrived, that I would feel anything again that surprised me? I had categorized my existence as complete, not happy, not unhappy, complete. The calculus of very long life is different from the calculus of a human one, and I had made peace with the arithmetic, and now, she asked. Now, he said. The arithmetic is completely wrong, and I am finding I do not mind. The eldest council filing took 4 weeks to prepare. They worked on it together, Astarion providing the legal knowledge of 1,000 years of vampire politics and precedent, Iris providing the structural clarity of someone who could take complex arguments and make them simple enough to survive adversarial scrutiny. During those 4 weeks, the court watched. Iris could feel the shift. Not acceptance, not yet, but something adjusting. The court had been told for centuries, in the particular language of consistent behavior, that Astarion Valamont was sovereign and cold and unreachable. And now he was spending 4 hours in the library every evening, working alongside a human woman who corrected his Latin and argued with his interpretations of Enlightenment political theory. And he was unmistakably lighter than he had been. Not less authoritative, not less commanding, but lighter in the way that something is lighter when it has set down a weight it has been carrying so long it had forgotten it was carrying it. Lady Vesra Danthil, who was 800 years old and had been watching Astarion for most of that time, came to find Iris one afternoon in the East Library. "You understand," Lady Vesra said, sitting across from her with the particular economy of movement of the very old, "what it is that you are asking this court to accept." "I think so," Iris said. "He had lovers before," Vesra said, not unkindly. "In the early centuries, before he became what the law required him to be. There were people he cared for. He lost them the way we always lose the ones we care for. And each loss changed him a little, and eventually the change was sufficient that he stopped reaching." She looked at Iris steadily. "The court is not cruel. We are simply old. We have watched this many times. We are trying to understand why this time is different." Cyrus considered the question seriously, because Lady Vesra deserved a serious answer. "I don't know that it is different," she said. "I can't know that. I'm not 800 years old. I don't have the comparative data." She paused. "What I can tell you is that I am not here for what he represents. I am not here for the court or the power or the extraordinary salary. Though again, I want to be clear, the salary is genuinely very good. I'm here because of who he is when no one is watching. And I think he has been waiting a long time for someone to be interested in that person specifically." Vesra looked at her for a long moment. "You are not what I expected," she said. "I get that a lot," Iris said. Something that might have been the beginning of respect moved through Vesra's ancient face. She stood, inclined her head in a gesture that Iris had learned was significant coming from someone of her seniority, and left the library without another word. 2 days later, Vesra was the first member of the senior court to formally acknowledge Iris in the corridor with the full honorific of a recognized companion, rather than the polite but distant greeting she had been receiving until then. Within a week, 6 of the elder lords and ladies had followed. Cassivian Mortmore had not. The council filing day arrived with the particular grey-cold clarity of a November morning. The artificial light in the underground court, cycling toward its daylight setting, while above them the city moved through its morning routines, completely unaware of the political event occurring 40 feet below its pavement. The eldest council met by secure connection. The elders scattered across the continent, convened via a system of encrypted communication that was simultaneously the most modern and most ancient thing Iris had ever encountered. Because the encryption protocols had been written in 1948, and the language in which they conducted business was 800 years old. Astarion presented the filing in Old Valak with the formal precision of someone who had attended more council sessions than most members had been alive for. Iris sat beside him in the formal position of recognized companion, which meant she was present, visible, and officially acknowledged by every member of the council. The legal opposition came, as expected, from Cassivian's allies, 3 council members who had been in communication with the Mora bloodline, and who raised the expected objections in the expected order. Iris had prepared responses to all of them. She delivered them. When Astarion indicated the moment, in the same voice she used for lecture hall presentations, clear, structured, without apology, the council deliberated for 2 hours. They returned a decision that granted full continental recognition of Iris Sterling's status as sovereign acknowledged companion of the Valemont court, with protections recognized across all signatory bloodlines, effective immediately and irrevocable without the declared companion's own consent. Cassivian's legal architecture had no remaining foundation. When the connection closed, Astarion sat back in his chair and looked at her with the expression she had come to love. The one that was all the way open, the one he only showed her, the one that was 1,000 years of complicated living, wearing its actual face. "It is done," he said. "It is done," she agreed. "Cassivian will appeal. Cassivian will find there is nothing to appeal to," she said. "I built the filing to close that specifically." She paused. He should spend his energy elsewhere. There are genuinely interesting things to do with a 600-year existence. Astarion's mouth curved, a full smile this time, rare and extraordinary as she always found it. Such as learning something new," Iris said. "Which is what I have always believed is the most reliable antidote to bitterness." "Is that what you think he is?" Astarion asked. "Bitter? I think he is old and powerful and has spent 6 centuries being very good at one particular kind of game," Iris said. "I think losing this one may be the most useful thing that has happened to him in a very long time." She tilted her head. "What do you think?" Astarion considered. "I think," he said, "that you have been teaching me to see the people I have been managing as people who might still change. I find I am not yet certain how to apply that consistently." "That is extremely normal," Iris said. "It is also exactly what I would say to a student who has just made a genuine intellectual breakthrough. You are doing very well." He laughed. She had heard him laugh before, quietly, sometimes with a dark edge. But this was different. This was lighter, and it filled the room in a way that made her feel something she recognized as home. The months that followed were not free of difficulty. Nothing in a court of ancient vampires with long memories and longer grudges could be called uncomplicated. But they were, unmistakably, good. Cassivian's appeal was filed and dismissed. The Mora bloodline withdrew its international challenge. Lady Vezra became something approaching an ally, sharing with Iris, over a sequence of careful conversations, a portrait of who Astarion had been in the centuries before the court required him to be only the king. It was both more and less than Iris had expected. More pain, more loss. More of the specific damage of someone who had learned to keep everything protected because the unprotected things had not survived. And less cruelty, less coldness. Less of the ice that the court had always attributed to character rather than to grief. Vesra told her about a human scholar he had protected in the 16th century, quietly for 12 years, until the scholar's death. She told her about a village he had funded through 3 hard winters, under an assumed name, because the people there had once sheltered him from hunters when he was very young, and he had never forgotten. She told her about the music he used to write, actual manuscripts from the Baroque period, under a name that appeared in 3 European archives, and was attributed to a composer who had died young. He stopped, Vezra said. Approximately 200 years ago, he said it had become too much like grief. Iris found the manuscripts in the archive room that Astarion had told her was inventory storage, and she had quietly investigated because she was constitutionally incapable of leaving a locked room uninvestigated. She sat on the floor of the archive room for an hour, reading through compositions that were extraordinary, technically perfect and emotionally devastating. Full of the kind of longing that only exists in someone who has been watching the world for long enough to understand exactly what it is they miss. She found him in the study that evening and set one of the manuscripts on the desk in front of him. He looked at it for a long time without speaking. "Vezra told you," he said finally. "She told me some things," Iris said. "The manuscript told me the rest." He picked it up. His expression did the thing she had come to think of as the unbuilding, the wall coming down, piece by piece, not collapsing but carefully dismantled. The way you take apart something you have maintained for so long, you are not sure what it was protecting anymore. "I have not played since." "You don't have to," she said. "I'm not asking you to perform grief for my education. I just wanted you to know that I know." She paused, "And that I think it is extraordinary, and that I think losing it was a significant loss for you, even if you have framed it as a practical decision." He was quiet for a moment. "You are very difficult to protect." I am extremely easy to protect, she said. You are confusing protection with control. Protecting me means keeping me safe. It does not mean keeping me ignorant. He looked at the manuscript in his hands. No, he said. I suppose it does not. He played that night. Not for the court, not yet, not for a long time, but in the study with the door closed, while she sat in the chair across from the desk and listened to 300 years of music unlock itself in the hands of someone who had been waiting to stop performing coldness long enough to let it back in. She did not say anything when it was done. She did not have to. He set the manuscript down and crossed the room to her, and she stood to meet him, and the kiss was different from the others. Not careful, not measured, but full of everything the music had opened, the room of people he carried being allowed to speak, the grief and the longing and the very specific, very personal warmth of someone who had decided, after 1,000 years, to stop choosing the armor. I love you, he said against her hair, with the directness of someone who had spent a very long time saying nothing and was done with that particular practice. I know, she said. I've known for a while. How long? Since the coat, she said. The night you covered me with your coat when I fell asleep in the library. You left before I woke up, but the coat was very recognizably yours, and the gesture was very recognizably you, the actual you, not the king. He held her more tightly. Outside the study, the court moved through its midnight routines, and above them the city continued its human business, and the world was exactly as complicated as it always was, and none of that had changed, and all of it felt different from inside this particular room. I love you, she said, because he had said it, and she was not going to be the person who left it unanswered. Iris, just her name. But the way he said it was its own full sentence. The formal court acknowledgement happened 3 months later, not as legal ceremony but as something quieter. Astarion arrived at a full court session and, at its close, publicly thanked the court for its service, and then, without elaboration or performance, introduced Iris not by her status under the declaration, but simply as the person he intended to build the next portion of his life alongside. It was unprecedented in its simplicity. The court, which had prepared itself for politics, received honesty, and responded with the slightly bewildered silence of a very old institution encountering something it had not developed protocols for. Lady Vesra started the acknowledgement. A small nod, formal, genuine. Lord Rothan, who had been one of Kazivian's outer allies and had quietly realigned in the weeks since the council revolute followed. One by one, the elder court acknowledged, and the acknowledgement was not unanimous. Kazivian Mora stood silent through it, which was his right and his choice. But it was sufficient, and it was real. Which was more than Iris had expected when she had arrived here 11 months ago, in a car that descended into a basement she had not been prepared for. Kazivian left the court 2 weeks after that, not expelled, that would have created a legal complication, but resigned, formally, with the quiet precision of someone who had calculated that staying inside a situation he could no longer influence was less useful than finding a different situation to operate within. Astarion let him go without drama, which was, Iris observed, the move of someone who had become secure enough not to need the drama of his adversary's departure. He'll be back, she said, when Kazivian's resignation was processed. Probably, Astarion agreed. In some form, at some distance, at some moment he believes is advantageous, and when he is, Astarion said, I will have very good legal counsel. Your legal counsel is a literature teacher, Iris pointed out. My legal counsel, he said, reads Old Valak for fun, dismantled 2 fraudulent international filings in the time it takes most people to read the cover page, and has a professional background in teaching people to argue clearly and think precisely. I consider the credentials sufficient. Iris accepted this. You should know, she said, that I have been thinking about what a permanent arrangement would look like. Astarion was quiet. She knew this particular quality of his quiet. It was not absence but attention, the full focused presence of someone giving a subject the weight it deserved. You are mortal, he said, not as a protest, as a fact being held carefully. I am, she said. And you are not, and that is, a real thing. Not a thing I am ignoring or romanticizing or failing to account for. I am very good at accounting for things. She looked at him steadily. There are options within your own law, are there not? There are precedents. The eldest council records include several historical cases of recognized companions who were offered the choice of transition with full and documented consent under specific protections. He had gone very still. You have been reading the historical cases. I have been reading everything available to me since month 2, she said. You really should be more careful about what you put in accessible libraries. Iris, I am not asking you to make a decision tonight, she said carefully. I am telling you that I know the option exists, that I have thought about it seriously and clearly, and without romanticizing the reality of what it involves, and that it is something I want to discuss with you, fully and honestly, the way we discuss everything. She paused. But not tonight. Tonight I just want you to know that when I said I intended to be here, I meant something more durable than I think you've allowed yourself to believe. He crossed the room and held her face in both hands again, the gesture she had come to love. It was specific to him, particular in the way he calibrated his strength, careful in the way his thumbs moved along her cheekbones, as though touching something he was still slightly amazed to be allowed to touch. I have been afraid, he said, to want something permanent. I know, she said, and I think you should stop being afraid of it. I think the arithmetic you recalculated when I arrived was correct, and I think the new equation has a different answer than the one you were living inside. What answer is that? That it is worth it, she said simply. The risk of loss, the vulnerability of feeling, all of it, worth it. Not because the math guarantees a good outcome, but because the math without the risk is not actually an equation. It's just a number sitting alone on a page. He kissed her forehead. It was a small gesture, gentle, and it was more than any of the formal declarations had conveyed, because it was private, and it was his, and it was not for the court or the law, but simply for her. I want a life, he said quietly. I want the thing I stopped letting myself want. I want evenings in the library and arguments about philosophy, and someone who will read old Valak documentation in their spare time, and know that I wrote music once and think it was worth knowing. His voice was very low. I want you specifically, Iris, and I want it permanently, and I think I have wanted it since approximately the 3rd week, when you told me that my interpretation of the French Revolution was structurally flawed and then explained why and were completely correct. That is an extremely specific moment to identify, she said. I told you, he said. I count everything. She laughed, and he held her. And the study was full of the quiet that comes after the important things have been said. And everything is rearranging itself into the shape of the life that is actually going to happen. They spent a long time talking about it. Months, because she would not rush it, and he would not ask her to rush it, and they both understood that the decision she was considering deserved the full weight of her attention and his honesty and the best and most complete information either of them could provide. She read every historical case. She spoke with Vesra, who had watched 2 recognized companions make the choice, and could describe with the careful precision of a very old memory both what was gained and what was changed, and what could never be recovered. She asked Astarion every question she could think of, and he answered all of them, and the ones he did not have answers to, he acknowledged as unknowns rather than pretending certainty he did not have. She asked him once, in the middle of a long evening, whether he would ask her not to if she decided she wanted to. He was quiet for a long time. No, he said finally. It is your choice, and I would not diminish it by trying to protect you from it. But I want you to know that I am content, Iris, in a way I had forgotten was possible. I do not need you to be immortal for my own sake. I need you to make this choice, if you make it, entirely because you want it, not for me. It would be for me, she said. Primarily, I like being alive. I would like to continue being alive, and I like the life I am building, which happens to include you, and several extraordinary libraries, and a court that is beginning to very cautiously accept me. Lady Vesra has begun referring to you as the strongest political mind to enter this court since the 14th century, Astarion said. The 14th century was a long time ago, Iris said. It is a very high compliment, he said, with the particular warmth of someone who means it completely, a year after she had arrived at the Valmont estate, with a 17-page confidentiality agreement and very sensible shoes. Iris Sterling made her decision. She made it the way she made all her important decisions, carefully, with full information, having identified and considered every alternative, having clearly articulated to herself what she was choosing and what she was not choosing and why. She made it in the complete absence of anyone pressuring her toward it, because Astarion had been scrupulous, almost to the point of frustration, about ensuring the pressure ran in absolutely neither direction. She told him on a Tuesday evening, in the library, with the artificial daylight cycling toward its evening setting, and 3 books open on the table between them, because she had discovered that she made her best decisions in conditions of comfortable familiarity. She told him she had decided yes. He had been still for so long she had thought she might need to repeat herself, and then he had put both hands over hers on the table and looked at her with the expression that was only ever for her. Completely open, completely real. The face beneath the king's face and the court's face, and the 1,000 years of careful maintenance, and said, in a voice that was very quiet and completely certain, that he was going to spend the rest of a very long time making sure she did not regret it. "I know," she said. "That's part of why I decided yes." The transition itself was conducted with the full legal protocols of the eldest council's recognized process, documented, witnessed by Vezra and 2 other elder members, preceded by a waiting period and 2 formal confirmation sessions, and every safeguard the ancient law required. Iris paid attention to every stage of it. She was not frightened, exactly. She was, as she had explained to Astarion, holding a very large feeling, very carefully, the way you hold something that is important and breakable, and she was good at that. Vesra sat with her the night before, and they talked until the artificial light had cycled through its full range, and Iris understood, from everything Vesra told her, that the woman who would come through the other side would still be herself, altered, changed, stronger and different, and carrying new weight alongside the old but herself. "You are going in clear," Vezra said. "He went in young and had no choice. That difference matters." "I know it matters," Iris said. "That's part of what makes it possible." What came after was its own story, the recalibration, the learning of a body that had changed, the discovery that her memory worked differently now, that time felt different, that the sensory world had a new precision that was at once wonderful and requiring enormous adjustment. Astarion was with her through all of it, steadily, without drama, the way he did everything important, and the court, which had observed the entire year-long process with the attentive interest of an ancient institution encountering a situation that was both legally precedented and practically unprecedented, adjusted in the way that old things adjust when something undeniable has taken root among them. Lady Vezra declared her satisfied. Several of the elder lords, following Vezra's lead, began the formal process of extending Iris the courtesies of senior recognized status. Even Rothane, who had been cautious throughout, came to offer his acknowledgement in terms that were brief and genuine. Cassivian Moray sent a formal communication from wherever he had installed himself 3 months after the transition, acknowledging the completion of the process. It was a legal communication, precise and emotionless, but it was an acknowledgement, which meant he had accepted the irreversibility, and that was what mattered. There was an evening in the spring after the transition. The first spring Iris experienced with new senses. The world outside the artificial cycles accessible now in ways it had not been before. The city above them alive with the specific quality of spring that she had always loved, and that now had an entirely new texture. When they walked in the private garden of the estate, the one built in the inner courtyard with the diffused light panels cycling overhead, and she told him what she had been thinking. "The court is different than it was," she said, "when I arrived." "Yes," he agreed. "You are different," she said. He looked at her. "I am lighter," she said. "I noticed it months ago, but it is very clear now. The weight you were carrying, the performance of coldness, the management of every response, you have set it down. You set it down for me," he said, "by refusing to be deceived by it." "I noticed it because I was looking," she said. "I was always looking from the first session. I thought. Here is someone who has built such a thorough architecture of protection that he has forgotten the building inside has different rooms than the facade suggests. And you decided to investigate." "I am constitutionally incapable of leaving a locked room uninvestigated," she said. "You knew this. I told you on week 2. He caught her hand as they walked, and the grip was easy and familiar. The way hands hold each other when holding hands is not a gesture, but simply a state of being. "Iris," he said, "I want to tell you something I have not found the correct moment to say." "All right. Before you arrived," he said, "I had begun to understand my own existence as essentially complete, not ended. Vampires do not think of themselves as ending, but closed. The important chapters done. The remaining length of time a kind of maintenance of what had already been built." He looked ahead at the garden, the light falling in golden panels through the diffused overhead screens. "You opened it again. Not by arriving exactly, or by any single thing you did, but by being someone who was genuinely there, who wanted the real conversation, who looked at me and wanted to know what was actually true rather than what was being shown." He paused. "I had forgotten that was possible." Iris tightened her grip on his hand. "For what it is worth," she said, "I had not expected to find this either. I expected a difficult employer and an interesting intellectual challenge and a very good salary. I did not expect to find someone who had been waiting for exactly the kind of company I happened to be." She looked at him. "We are, between us, an extremely specific combination of unlikely circumstances." "We are," he agreed, with the warmth she had come to need the way she had once needed morning coffee. "Consistently, unremarkably, essentially. And I find I am grateful, Iris, genuinely. In a way I had not expected to be grateful for anything again." "You were always capable of it," she said. "The gratitude, the feeling, the warmth, all of it. The court thought you were cold. They were wrong. They just did not have enough information." "They had plenty of information," he said. "I curated it carefully. Yes, well." She stopped walking and turned to face him in the garden, the light falling around them both, the city humming its distant human business above. "Your curation was always the problem. You are not actually cold, Astarion. You are someone who decided that cold was safer and kept the decision long past the point where it was serving you." "I know," he said. "You have explained this to me very thoroughly." "I am a teacher," she said. "Thorough explanation is the job." He pulled her closer, both hands at her waist, and looked at her with the open, unguarded, specifically personal expression she had first seen in the study the night after the Great Hall, and had been slowly receiving in larger measures ever since, until by now it was simply his face. The real one, the one that had always existed beneath the cold. "Stay," he said, which was not a command, it was not even a request. It was the specific word that meant everything they had built and were building. The library evenings and the Voltaire arguments, and the music unlocked, and the archived compositions, and the careful honest conversations about difficult things, and the years that were now extending in front of them, with a length that was no longer a source of grief, but of something he was still learning to name. "I'm not going anywhere," Iris said. And she was not. And he knew it, and the court, moving through its midnight routines in the rooms around them, in the slow ongoing life of something very old that had found, unexpectedly, a reason to be new again, was beginning to understand something it had not previously known about its king. He was not cold. He had never been cold, he had simply been waiting. As the old always wait, with the patience of long experience and the private ache of long longing. For someone willing to look past the architecture and find the rooms inside. Iris Sterling had looked. She had found him, and he had been behind all of it. Behind the 1,000 years of careful performance and sovereign discipline and accumulated grief, exactly what she had suspected from the very first session. Someone profoundly, specifically, remarkably worth knowing. They stayed in the garden until the light panels shifted toward their late-night setting, the artificial sky softening to its deep version, and the city above them moved through its own rhythms, and the court inside the estate settled into its quiet hours, and the two of them remained where they were, side by side, hand in hand, unhurried, with the particular ease of people who have all the time they need and have chosen to spend it here. Above the estate, the city turned through its seasons. Mortals moved through their quick and urgent lives, unaware of the world beneath the pavement, unaware of the court that had stood for 1,000 years, and was quietly beginning its next chapter. Unaware of the human teacher who had arrived with sensible shoes and 17 pages of counter-proposals, and had, by being completely and irreducibly herself, unlocked the one thing 1,000 years of vampire politics and court performance had not managed to touch, not the throne, not the law, Not the long and complicated history of a man who had watched the world change around him more times than most minds could hold, his heart, hidden and kept and now, finally, fully open, and Iris Sterling, who had always believed that the most important rooms were the locked ones, found that this particular room was worth everything it had taken to open it, worth the blade at her throat, and the legal battles, and the old Valak grammar, and the difficult conversations, and the monumental, irreversible, fully considered decision she had made on a Tuesday evening with 3 books open on the table. It was worth every word of it. She had known it would be, almost from the beginning. She had simply been waiting for him to know it too.